Hi everybody, Julie Ebersol for EllenHutson.com. Welcome to Hello Monday. Today I'm going to be doing some faux watercoloring by reactivating Art Graphic Twin markers. Now these awesome markers are completely water-based, and I love the fact that they're dual tipped. They have a durable rubber brush nib at one end, and then they have a fine writing tip at the other, and I just wanted to show you a close-up of that. But I'm primarily going to be working with the large rubber brush nib. And when I say a brush nib, it's shaped like a brush, but it's not fibrous. You know, it doesn't have bristles like a real paintbrush does. So this is definitely a marker. But because that rubber nib is so durable, it can hold up to lots of different applications here without fraying. So I've inked up the image by applying the color, holding the marker in a horizontal fashion so that the widest portion of that rubber nib is going across the top of my stamp. And then once I'm done inking that up, because these markers are so nice and juicy, I can just go ahead and stamp it right onto my watercolor paper. And I'm stamping on the smoother side of some 140-pound Canson watercolor paper. This is my go-to watercolor paper, and it's kind of important that you're working on watercolor paper for this technique because it's not going to work well on regular cardstock. Now I will clean off the stamp in between changing marker ink colors because I don't want to have any cross-contamination of my markers. So once I'm done with stamping a certain color, I will go ahead and use my stamp chamois to clean it off and a lint-free dry cloth to go ahead and dry the image off and then apply a new color. And then once I got to this point, I realized, you know, I think I need just a few more stampings here just to kind of fill it out a little bit more. So I'm just going to ink up a portion of that image and go ahead and position it. And as you can see, I kind of swirl around there with my stamp and rotate it a bit before I make a final decision on the direction or the placement of it. But once that's done, I can go ahead and take a water brush, and I have a napkin there or a paper towel that I can blot against in case I have too much water on the tip of my water brush. And what I'm going to do is just start spreading that color and reactivating it, because when I stamped it, it dried, you know, down into the watercolor paper, but you can reactivate it because it is water-based by just taking a water brush. So I'm going to have a very controlled watercolor effect by doing this. This is very different from coloring onto the stamp and then spritzing it with water, because in that method, you really don't have a lot of control, and you kind of have to wing it and hope that everything, you know, kind of turns out as you're hoping and be happy with very serendipitous results. But if you're a person that requires a lot of control, this might be an alternative for you to try, because I can determine how much water very specifically gets spread across that image. I can blur the image lines if I want to, and I'm kind of sort of doing that as I spread this color around. So the image that you saw stamped will not resemble what we end up with by the time we're done spreading all this color around. And I'm just taking care to move onto a dry area and spread the color out, and I'll just go back after an area I've already painted with water is dry so that I don't have too much bleeding of one color into another color unless I really want it to. So I'm just going to continue this fashion until I'm completely done, and then I'm going to use my heat gun to go ahead and heat set that, make sure everything is nice and dry, because for the next step, it'll look the best if my watercolor project is dry. I'm going to take the black marker and ink up directly onto an acrylic block and then use my water brush to flick a very fine spatter of that black marker ink onto my project. Now I did rotate the block. Once I'd used up all that color, I moved to a dry spot on the acrylic block instead of that same spot that already had water on it, because I don't want the marker to wick up water into it and dilute the color inside the marker. So it's very important that you rotate around to a dry spot or wipe off the acrylic block before you apply more color with the marker, and then you can come back in and start flicking it with your water brush. And here you can see what it looks like, this nice fine spatter effect. And you can get heavier if you want, but I really liked this. I thought it gave some interest and texture to my project, so I'm just going to leave it alone now, and then I'm going to grab a sentiment from the stamp set called Totally Awesome and plan my words out. So I'm just kind of laying these out, and I will kind of futz around with them before I close the lid to mount the stamps to the inside there and continue on with stamping the sentiment. So once I have that in place and I'm happy with it, I'm going to grab some VersaFine Onyx Black and ink up the image there on the lid of the MISTI, and then go ahead and close it and get that stamped in place. And as you can see, it's going to be nice and perfect. If I had needed to, I could have re-inked and stamped again, but I got it right the first time, so no worries. I'm going to go ahead and pop that out of my MISTI, and then move over to my paper trimmer and go ahead and trim down the sentiment. I'm going to actually split it where the word wonderful is, and then I'm going to go ahead and use some tape runner here. This one's by Thermoweb. Go ahead and mount that to a base card I've already made from some Neenah Solar White. This is just a standard A2 card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I like to work from the bottom up when I do a card like this, so I start at the bottom, and then here's where the word wonderful was trimmed out, and I'm just going to mount some foam tape to the back of that. Just get that trimmed down so that it fits and isn't too wide. And I kind of trim it a little bit narrower than this strip is here, so I have some fudge room when I'm placing it down onto the base card. Now I took the top panel and went ahead and kind of positioned it just to make sure everything was going to fit properly onto my card. I knew it was because I wasn't really doing that much fancy, but you know, sometimes you want to double check and make sure you don't have any excess hanging off the edges. And then once the popped up wonderful was mounted in place, I could come back with more tape runner and mount the top portion. And it's kind of fun because it has that elevated look that really pops up the sentiment without it being overly dimensional or overly complicated. So now I'm going to take my Nuvo drops, and this is the ebony black, and I did kind of burp it there a little bit against my paper towel to make sure I didn't have any air bubbles. And I'm just squirting out various sized drops and holding it straight up and down. And now I'm going to take it, this is something I recently started doing, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to slap the back of it. I'm holding it horizontally and I'm just carefully avoiding touching where any of that Nuvo drops are wet, and gripping it and just slapping it down against my work surface. And this really makes those Nuvo drops flatten out quite a bit like enamel dots, and it works out awesome. We have more still shots available at the Classroom blog, and all the supplies are available at ellenhutson.com. Thanks for watching.